as we come together to discuss education behind and beyond the prison walls within our country. I'm Zach Presutti. I'm a Jesuit of the East Coast province of the Society of Jesus. I'm humbled by the privilege to be able to be the founder of Thrive for Life Prison Project that's transforming lives both behind and beyond the prison walls. And it's an honor to be your moderator tonight for tonight's very important conversation. Given the nature of our global health emergency that we find ourselves in during these pandemic days, there will be no fireside at our chat tonight. So I'm sure you can use your own imaginations to picture the fire, and that will warm your space during this conversation. We would like to thank all of you for attending this virtual gathering and hope that you enjoy the conversation. We eagerly await your comments and your questions at the end of our conversation. And you can just simply submit your questions through the chat option at the bottom of the Zoom platform. Also, in order to just keep ourselves on track and be able to hear one another, we do ask you to mute your microphone. That's on the lower left-hand or right-hand corner of your Zoom platform. And we also would just want to remind you that at the end of at the end of hearing from our panelists, what we'll be doing is entertaining some of the conversations and generating some conversations amongst all of you and those that are on the panel. So without any further ado, I would like to take the opportunity to thank all our sponsors for this event and also introduce to you all the wonderful panelists for this evening. And we could start, if you don't mind, with Mr. Jerrel Gantt. If you wouldn't mind, Jerrel, just introducing yourself, your title, the organization you're a part of, and its mission.
How you doing, Brother Zach? Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Jerrel Gantt. I'm a resident scholar here at Ignacio House. I'm right now going for my MBA in business analytics at Mercy College. I'm actually a recreation coordinator here at Ignacio House as well, and I'm a club manager at Blink Fitness. Yeah, those are the organizations that I'm associated with. I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous, but okay. Also, I'm a personal trainer. Sorry about that. Certified personal trainer.
Good plug, Jerrel. So if anybody needs to get some fitness in shape after we've been doing this lockdown, they can contact you. Thank you for that. Pietro Rivoli, please.
My name is Pietra Rivoli, and I'm a faculty member at the School of Business at Georgetown University. And 3 years ago, the business school, in cooperation with the Prison and Justice Initiative, formed the Pivot program, which serves returning citizens in the District of Columbia with education as well as entrepreneurship training. And professional skills development. And we are a partnership also with the DC government.
Thanks so much, Pietra. Joshua Miller.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Josh Miller. I'm a philosophy professor at Georgetown, and I work about half the time for Pietra in the Pivot program, and the other half the time I'm the director of education for the Prisons and Justice Initiative. Our mission is to examine the problem of mass incarceration from the theoretical and practical perspectives and to try to address it and provide solutions. We offer college in prison at the DC jail, and we're going to be offering a program in the state of Maryland soon.
Pietra, if you don't mind, would you share a little bit about the history of the Pivot program to date?
So we are in our third year, and we operate pretty much on an academic calendar. So we are now serving the third class of what we call our Pivot Fellows. So we started off with a group of about 18, and that I think is kind of our ideal size. We're a little smaller this year because of the pandemic, but the fellows enter our program for a period of academic training where they're with us in the classroom. They then move to internships, and then we help them with either venture development or transitioning into employment. Okay. In terms of the history, or I guess you might want to think of it as kind of the motivation, you know, as a business school, business people tend to think, you know, we're very practically oriented. We think often in problem-solving terms. Okay. And one of the problems that, of course, is so apparent in our home city of the District of Columbia, you know, is the mass incarceration problem, especially as it relates to racial justice. And, you know, as a business school, we see almost a problem to be solved. You know, thousands of incredibly talented people who want to contribute to their communities and their families and the local economy. On the one hand, are justice involved and face all kinds of, you know, barriers that, you know, people on this call are familiar with. On the other side, we have businesses and organizations in a very dynamic city that are always seeking people, always seeking talent. And so, you know, the problem that the Pivot program is designed to address is, you know, how do we serve both of these needs in our community? How do we create pathways, you know, for justice involved people so that they can contribute in our local economy, in our local businesses, in our local organizations. So, you know, it's our history, our founding is kind of motivated by that problem-solving approach.
Thank you, Pietra. And Josh, do you mind just sharing a little bit about exactly what you do behind the walls and what is offered behind the walls through Georgetown?
Sure, certainly. So we have a program at the DC Jail, and at the DC Jail, we offer credit courses across the spectrum. So anything from biology to philosophy to political science to history to literature. We are also going to be offering a bachelor's degree program in the Patuxent Institution in Jessup, Maryland. And there we'll be offering three majors: interdisciplinary social science, cultural humanities, and global intellectual history. All told, right now we serve about 50 students at the DC Jail, and we're looking to grow to serve about 100 to 120 students in Patuxent. That's in addition to supporting the work in Pivot.
Thanks, Josh. And I can take the opportunity to share with you a bit about the mission and ambitions of Thrive for Life Prison Project. As I shared with you before, we're very grateful to be able to partner with Georgetown and all the good work that they're doing also behind and beyond the prison walls. Thrive for Life Prison Project got its start behind the walls, offering retreats that are rooted in Ignatian spirituality. Some on this call might be familiar with St. Ignatius, the founder of the Society of Jesus. And we do these retreats in 6 different correctional facilities throughout the New York metropolitan area, in collaboration with spiritual mentors who are either parishioners of Jesuit parishes or alums of our universities and colleges. And we started doing that in 2017. And then just last June, we celebrated our one year anniversary of opening up our transitional supportive living community for returning citizens who are continuing that college education that they started, that good work of college education that they started while they were locked up. So this coming June will be our second year. And we did this purely out of our desire to respond to the needs of the relationships that we were forming behind the walls. Through these retreats, we were going to very deep levels with our brothers and sisters behind the walls in these monthly retreats activities. And we found that it just wasn't simply good enough to be sharing just how much God loves them. That's a start. But as you're aware, 600,000 men, women, and children are released back into our communities every single year from incarceration, looking for housing, looking for employment, looking to continue that education that we started. So it was really through the relationships that we formed with our brothers and sisters behind the walls that we realized that now is the time to really be able to offer that continuity of care from behind the walls to beyond the walls through a transitional supportive living community where they can continue the good work of the college education that they started while they were locked up. And so perhaps I would like now to turn to Jerrel, if you don't mind. Jerrel, would you mind just sharing a little bit with us, describing your education experience once you returned back into the community, your residency at Ignacio House, and just how your education has been unfolding through Mercy College as you work to obtain your MBA?
Okay. So when I actually was released in 2019, November 2019, and I came straight to Ignacio House at that time. I always knew that I had my bachelor's before I actually got incarcerated. So I always knew that I wanted to pursue my master's. So that was like one of the first things that I did. And I had so much support from Ignacio House and Thrive for Life to actually do that. So I got into the MBA program at Mercy College, and through the pandemic, I actually started the Turbo program, which was like a 3-week crash course. So I went through that. It was like the perfect time to do it because I was home all day. I had nothing else to do. So it was just like straight focus. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life, even though it's through Zoom and now it's all online classes and it's a little harder than it would be in class, but it's still one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life to pursue my MBA. So one of the reasons I wanted to do it was for definitely an increase in earnings. But what I'm getting is I have the opportunity to learn. I'm learning different ways of thinking and developing and growing. So it's just an amazing experience. Everything that I've gotten at Ignacio House is just all about support. Definitely the enrichment activities. Ignacio House is based on the enrichment activities of the spiritual, the physical, the emotional, intellectual. There's one more. Sorry about that. Okay, sorry about that. But it's 5 spiritual pillars. But I think it was the spiritual. So these enrichment activities have definitely helped to support me in so many different ways. Definitely with Ignacio House, it's a comfortable living space. So I have time to focus. I have time to focus on my studies. While I'm at work, I don't have to think about where I'm living or my living arrangements or anything like that. I can just focus on work, focus on school, which is just amazing. Definitely resources. They have job coaching, financial advisors, tutors, social services. Is so many different experiences that I'm gaining from Ignacio House, and this is just a perfect situation. It's a perfect mesh.
Thanks so much, Jerrel. Petra, can I ask you, what inspired you to co-found something like the Georgetown Pivot Program, and how has your background in business and pedagogy informed your perspective on prison education and criminal justice reform? I think you might be muted, Petra.
So I have, just because of family circumstances, I have many decades of experience with some phases of the criminal justice system because my brother was incarcerated for many years. So I had I had the lens of a family member. And, some of the things I learned using that lens, just looked to me like problems that were easily solvable in some ways. And when I thought about, the barriers that people were facing when they came home, again, I think my inspiration was really in thinking about, these are business problems, and we have the tools to solve them. Okay? And so it was really, I'm at the kind of at the end of my career at Georgetown. I have spent, more than 30 years. And at about 3 or I guess about 4 years ago, I was asked to assume an administrative role in the school. And that was as the vice dean. And what I thought at the time is, I don't want to just be an administrator. I would like to play a role in creating something that we can leave behind, as I go off to my retirement on my, not sure, camper van or sailboat or something. I was just motivated to try to stand something up that would live on. And Georgetown University is it's a wonderful university. It is engaged in the city of Washington in various ways, but in some ways it's a very, it's a white place up on a hill, a little bit apart from much of our city. And I think that, it's important for all of us at Georgetown to figure out how we can be more a part of our community. And, this was an avenue, I thought, where, we could just have a lot of impact.
Absolutely, Pietra. And I'd like to also introduce our fourth person on our panel, George Chochos. George, would you mind introducing yourself, sharing a little bit about where you're working, your title?
I'm sure. Sorry, I'm late. I just had to switch from being in class at Georgetown, a PhD program, to this. So I'm still working through that in my mind. But good evening, everybody. My name is George Chochos. I'm the Senior Federal Policy Associate at the Vera Institute of Justice, where I work on a number of different prison and criminal justice reform issues.
George, thank you so much. And like Jerrel, George, you spent some years behind the walls of our prison system. Would you mind telling us about the educational prison programs offered by Bard College and the New York Theological Seminary that you encountered while you were inside, and what that meant to you, and particularly how it informed where you are right now?
Sure. So hopefully as a Baptist preacher, I won't be too long-winded. Just cut me off if it gets too long.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So I entered prison in New York in 2000. It was, and some people had told me that, George, it's going to be a pretty rough bid because there are no more programs. And I know that somebody had mentioned there were no college programs. I didn't know. I mean, now I know it today in my work. But 6 years prior to the time I entered into prison, Bill Clinton signed into law his now infamous omnibus bill that had ended federal Pell Grant eligibility for people in prison. And so because federal Pell dollars was the main funding source for a lot of these programs, imagine in 1994, there's roughly 300 programs and 1,200 facilities across the country. The federal tap runs dry because the bill passes with a ban on federal Pell Grant eligibility. And within 3 years, there's only around 8 programs in the whole country. And so that's the world that's the prison world I entered in 2000. And so the first jail I went to, first day prison, was the infamous Sing Sing prison. It kind of sits on the majestic Hudson River, and it has this beautiful view, except it's marred by prison bars. And so looking for the transitional services office, as if you have to take these programs, transitional services, as if somehow you can transition into becoming an inmate or a prisoner, right? Like you're supposed to somehow get acclimated to being in prison, as if a human can ever do that, get used to being locked in a cage. And so trying to walk into that room, I was out of place and walked into, I found out there was one program left in the state, a privately funded program, a master's program offered by New York Theological Seminary. And I had a Christian experience, so I'm thinking God is playing a trick on me. You're showing me a master's degree. I didn't have 4 transferable credits to my name. There were no undergraduate programs at the time that I could take advantage of. And eventually I get shipped around, and I end up shipped around from prison to prison, and I end up at Eastern Correctional Facility, not knowing that Bard College had started offering courses. They hadn't had a graduation yet. They didn't even know if they were going to have a BA program. But 4 years into my sentence, I was one of the 15 people that was accepted into Bard. And a way to kind of say it is, I began to will, I found the will to dream in a nightmare. Everything started to change. The prison seemed different. My life seemed different. My role in it, there was like a sense of hope, I think, breaking into this very dark place. The conversations were different. You know, you walked around the yard and people are talking about Foucault and they're talking about philosophy and sociology, not just sitting around thinking of what am I going to do with my life, as I have to sit here and many times people thinking I may not get, you know, how am I going to get out of here with my life? So it gets to reshape not just how you see yourself, but also the meaning of the very institution itself, which is what really Bard College tries to do, right? This the transformation of the individual and also the institution as a whole. And so eventually I earned an AA and a BA degree, and almost 10 years to the day that I walked into that master's classroom by accident after being away from the jail for almost 10 years. I was back in that master's classroom with an associate's degree, 2 bachelor's degrees, got the master's degree. And I can say that Sing Sing felt like, it was literally like a tale of 2 prisons. The way Sing Sing felt in 2001 was hopelessness, despair. It was like, it almost like choked you. It's like you could feel it, like somebody actually having like a soft choke around your neck. I mean, I don't know how else to explain it. Like there's this external pressure on you that seeks to kind of get into your very psyche and institutionalize you to where all you do is see yourself as a number, because they erase your name and kind of give you a number when you come into the prison system where you're no longer an individual. I was no longer George Chochos. I was 01A0532. And that number kind of expressed and defined my existence. And so higher education inside of prison, I would say, is one of the, if not the arguably most humanizing elements in a dehumanizing institution, where everything about the institution kind of impresses upon you that you're a failure. From the regimented way that you have to wear your clothes to the regimented way in which your cell looks, just anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. And so if you think of those college classrooms, the people that come in and teach there, they're not an extension of the state. They're not an extension of the system. So you don't feel like a number. Your humanity is validated. It's probably the only kind of relationships that kind of mirror those that relate to thriving in society. And so when I was released, and I had met somebody who was on the Dean's Advisory Council at Yale University School of Divinity, when I got out and I went to Yale, literally not even 2 years out of being in prison. Imagine going from a space like Sing Sing, where literally people die in, to a place like Yale. I knew how to be a student. It was one of the only roles that kind of seemed anything analogous to something that I could use as a way to navigate this, you know, to use a Barthian phrase, this strange new world that I was in society. And so this does this for a lot of people. And so I know we want to maybe talk later about the benefits, but the educational programs really helped me to see myself and the world differently. It helped to transform the meaning of how, it helped to transform me, but also the meaning of the institution, how I see the world. And made me wanting to engage the world in particular types of ways when I come out, where I wanted to be an asset, not a liability to my community anymore.
Thanks so much, George. And also thank you so much for all the work you've done in lobbying in DC and through your position that you have, but also through your living narrative that helped to work to get these Pell Grants restored for our brothers and sisters behind the walls. You've worked very hard at that. Josh, can I ask you, how, now that these Pell Grants have been reinstated, not right this second. They're looking at, I think it's next year. George, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but how can we maintain quality now that the Pell Grants have been restored? And the new legislation gives the Department of Corrections responsibility for adjudicating the quality. And are they well suited for these determinations?
It's a great question, Zach. First of all, I just want to welcome George, who like me, went to Bard.
Hi, and welcome to this online public dialogue on Black women and criminal injustice, missing voices in the U.S. incarceration.
Sorry, that wasn't me. I just want to say how pleasant it is to be on a panel with him, because we share an alma mater, we share an advisor, and I've learned a lot from him over the years. In answer to your question, I think before Pell was eliminated, there was a strong tendency for the community college system to pick up the slack in prisons, and they didn't always do that with an eye to quality. I've heard stories from people about classes in the history of chewing gum is one example I heard in the state of New Jersey, or classes were sort of being brought in on VHS tape. And they were just watching recordings of lectures, and they were kind of getting pass-fail grades. So that sort of thing happened before Pell was eliminated. And in the interregnum, when there was no Pell, the only programs that could exist were programs that had a real sense of mission, a real commitment to the value of education, especially the liberal arts, as sort of techniques for freedom and emancipation. And so, you know, people put their hearts and souls into it and wouldn't skimp. We have seen the growth of some for-profit or maybe, you know, dodgy, you know, prison education programs. And I think that going forward with Pell restored, we have to make sure we don't end up in the same position we were before it was eliminated. It had to be restored, right? So we have been experimenting now for 8 years with, for 6 years with second chance Pell. So some schools like Georgetown have had the ability to access Pell Grants, but that, you know, the schools had to apply. There was a very selective process. And again, there was a commitment to quality for the most part. I would like to make sure that the DOCs who are making these determinations going forward do so with an eye to making sure that not just that there's high quality education throughout. I think that just has to be a requirement. We have to avoid the sort of pitfalls of lower ed, as Trustee Cotton McMillan calls it. But also, and perhaps most importantly, they need to make sure to expand access throughout their states. Right now, prison education programs tend to be located close to, you know, the centers of education in the state. In a place like Maryland, where we'll be operating, the prison education all happens on the corridor between DC and Baltimore, because, you know, there are all these universities in Baltimore and there are all these universities in DC, and we sort of drive up or down 95 to get to the prisons. There are prisons in the far-flung western edges of the state and the far-flung eastern edges of the state. It's going to be very tempting to locate education in those places on tablets, you know, virtually in other ways. You know, first of all, we should confront the fact that we have not just displaced incarcerated Americans behind the walls, but we've thrown them as far away as we possibly can, right? So there's a series of policies there around prison gerrymandering and you know, sort of trying to create jobs programs in rural areas that we really need to challenge and question. And I see prison education as a part of an overall decarceral strategy. But second of all, we just need to make sure that those students or applicants or, you know, potential students in prisons all across the country, all 2.3 million of them, have access to a high quality college education and aren't sort of shunted into a secondary and lower quality system. I think you're right that the DOC, well, so the legislation does provide that responsibility to the DOCs, and I think that they're going to have to lean on their state higher education commissions to help them do that. I hope they do. I think in many cases they will.
Thanks so much, Josh, and thanks to you and George as highlighting this, the crucial reality of the reinstatement of the Pell Grants and how that's going to open up more people having access to education, and the importance of the Department of Corrections collaboration and making sure this is done well and done with great quality. Jerrel, I might ask you, you're a living example of someone who's continuing their education after returning back to the community. Could you share a little bit about how you see the Ignacio House of Studies holistic suite of services, the supportive services that are offered at Ignacio's, how crucial that is for someone who's returning back into the community from incarceration and continuing their education?
Well, I think basically throughout for life, like I would say just even going from behind the walls, like even the retreats, the holistic and with the spiritual, I just think like as long as there's a framework for this particular this study and helping people in this sense, as long as the framework is there, like it was something that you said to me one time that if you build it, they will come. So I always kept it in my head. And if this thing is here and if this framework is here, then basically people who are in need of it God will lead them there. And that's exactly what God did for me, which was lead me towards you and lead me towards Thrive for Life and then Ignacio House. But I just think that is definitely something that's needed. Also, it's a companion throughout incarceration. So you guys were always there with me throughout the whole incarceration. And even with, it's just like, when I think about it, it's just amazing to just know that you guys were there from the time that I got incarcerated to work release to getting off of incarceration to parole to now I'm in Ignacio House and now I'm studying for my MBA. It's just like you guys are always there with me and it's just like a trusted companion in a sense. So I just think that it just definitely is such a big support, the enrichment activities, just the love and the community that I receive here at Ignacio House. That's another thing that I always think about is we're a house of residents of scholars. So it's so many different people here who have so many different studies and are focusing on so many different things, but we can all be influenced by each other. So I may see something that another brother is doing and I get influenced by that. Or I may take something from another brother and try to make it my own. It's just like a give and take situation. So definitely the community, definitely the support that I'm receiving here at Ignacio House, the enrichment activities, just everything together combined makes it the perfect situation for me to just thrive.
Thanks so much, Jerrel, for highlighting that important part of community and the relational part of companionship that's necessary for the supportive services. Petra, given your experience with Pivot at Georgetown, might you be able to share a little bit about what makes the Pivot program at Georgetown unique or stand out as unique among other education initiatives working with returning citizens?
So I guess there are a couple things. First of all, I think that it is somewhat common for universities around the country to be involved in some way on education on inside the walls. Okay. I don't know of other programs at leading business schools at universities that are engaged in the kind of cooperative relationship we have with a city government. So we have a relationship that is kind of embedded in the Department of Employment Services in the DC government. And so really what we have is a relationship between the DC government and the major university in the District of Columbia. There are many other reentry programs in DC and of course around the country. But I think that cooperative model is pretty unique. One of the features that is, that is attractive about the model is that, our participants have access to a range of resources of a school like Georgetown, right? So even in even simple things, they have an ID card, they can, use the library, they have Georgetown email addresses, things like that. So I think it's a powerful, it's a powerful message about how our Pivot Fellows belong to this, Georgetown community. And of course, Georgetown is a university that's 230 years old. So it's a permanent part of the landscape of this city. And so, this is, I think it feels and is for our Pivot Fellows a kind of solid relationship with an important institution. Okay. And I think that is, that's meaningful on a number of levels from the, not just the resources themselves, but the signals it sends about belonging and about community.
Absolutely. George, you've been working for a while on the reinstatement of the Pell Grants for incarcerated students. This has been your passion. Might you be able to just give us a little bit of an overview of the context of maybe the last year and a half of arriving at this point of the reinstatement of the Pell Grants, and then where we're going from here? When can we see these Pell Grants actually being able to have be in the hands of our brothers and sisters behind the walls and access to furthering their education?
Sure. Hope I can give you the condensed version. I had to actually speak to Vera's board about this a little earlier, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. So the last year, without going too far into all like the intimate details, I mean, it was nothing less than a roller coaster ride. In speaking with one Hill staffer, she said that they thought at any moment like Pell was just going to fall apart. And so over the last couple of years, there was this growing bipartisan consensus on the general policy of Pell restoration, but there was really three positions that emerged. One was the House Democrat position of Pell for all, plus these guardrails or quality measures that I think Josh was talking about a second ago, championed kind of like by Bobby Scott in the House, representative from Virginia. Then there was Senator Alexander's position, who was the outgoing Republican senator, was the chairman of the Help Committee, and his was, all right, I'll bring back Pell, but it's Pell for some. He wanted to exclude certain people based on sentence type and sentence length. And then there was this middle of the road position that had, so that was the Republican position. Then there was this middle of the road position that had both Democrat and Republican support, but really heavily Democrat position, represented in the REAL Act, where it was just a clean lift, meaning bring back Pell for all, no exclusions, but also no quality measures. And so as COVID hit, it seemed like the way to get this done was going to be in the Higher Education Act reauthorization. COVID hit, all talk stopped, and it was all COVID all the time. And so we knew the only thing that was going to be moving was the appropriations process. So it's like, hey, how can we pitch Pell restoration to appropriators who don't like to do new language in funding bills? And we were told towards the end, we were told that Republicans said in the Senate, no way, there's no way we're doing a legislation like this in a funding package. But then we knew that Lamar Alexander wanted to retire. And he wanted to pass his legacy legislation of FAFSA simplification. We can talk about that another time. And so we banked on the fact that he was going to come to Bobby Scott, because Bobby Scott was on the relevant committee in the House, and Alexander from the relevant committee in the Senate. And we knew that he was going to come to Bobby Scott and say, hey, listen, I want to get my legacy passed. What priorities do you have? Now, the College Affordability Act had 1,000 pages of text of Democrat educational priorities. So we had to turn Pell into a possible choice to the choice. We did that, and then in the very end, it was Lamar Alexander, the champion of Pell for some, that had to become the champion of Pell for all and pitch it and get Mitch McConnell to actually put it in the stimulus / government funding bill that passed last year. And it wasn't even the middle of the road REAL Act. It was Bobby Scott's position of Pell with these quality measures. And so now what does that mean? Actually, the bill text tells us that it's really not supposed to take effect until 2023. But there is this caveat that if the Secretary of Education wants to get it done, he can signal it, start the initiative, and so it can start this year. We have to get the quality guidelines. So we have this bill text, but then it has to get translated into policy guidelines, and that's not always easy. And so there's this tension between, and this is what many of the groups and Vera and others are working on. It's the tension between the need to get this done now and the need to get this done well. And so we're trying to work through getting these policy guidelines together. And sometimes some of the best ways to do that is create your own guidelines and then pitch it to the secretary instead of coming in and saying, hey, listen, you guys need to get all your stuff together and get these guidelines, kind of give them a roadmap maybe for how to structure their thought around what bringing back college and prison at national scale looks like. So definitely 2023, possibility of this year, but again, bringing it back in a way and navigating this tension between the need to get it done now and the need to have it be quality.
Thanks so much, George. And again, thank you for your hard work on all this. And I would like to thank Josh, Pietra, Jerrel, and George for your great background in this. For the last 10 minutes of our conversation, I'd like to turn to some of the questions that have come up in our chat box. And one of them is looking at the DC jail and the 50 people you're working with. What is an idea of the range of educational backgrounds of the people that you're seeing, and also the ESL? How do you respond to the ESL needs, and how do you approach the different levels and ranges of skills? Would you mind taking that one, Josh?
Sure. So at the DC jail, there are people who do not have an adult basic education, and there are people who have PhDs. The people that we serve all have a GED or high school diploma, but by and large, you don't end up in prison unless you have been badly served by the education system, and that's what we find. We find that people have a high school diploma or a GED that they've gotten while incarcerated, and we still we need to meet them where they are. They haven't been comfortable in school in the past. School has not really felt like it fit for them. So there's one group that's like that meets the minimum bar, but we have to make higher education a welcoming place for them, and provide co-curricular sort of instruction to keep them on track. There's a second group though, and this is the one I would emphasize, because this is the one that these are people like George, right, who basically are self-educated while incarcerated for a good deal of time. They're brilliant and have been reading and forming their own thoughts and think tanks and policy discussions the entire time they've been incarcerated. And I have to say that I've been really lucky to run into, hundreds now of incarcerated students who have that profile. So, I would say poorly served by education usually, and yet with a hunger, a thirst for knowledge, a curiosity, a willingness to learn, a desire to engage. And so I think we do tend to overplay the extent to which incarcerated folks are underprepared, and underestimate the extent to which they bring, really massive human capital quality to the table. In terms of ESL, we offer all of our programs in English, and our sort of entrance examinations are all in English. We have tried to do some instruction in Spanish, and we haven't really been able to get that off the ground. So we're always willing to revisit that if the right personnel show up, though.
George, here's a question for you that's come from our audience. For those who are less familiar with how Pell Grants work, can you speak to how Pell actually functions as a resource for our sisters and brothers behind the walls? And does the Pell reinstatement for incarcerated people mean that less federal funding will be available for other people?
Sure, I'll try to give a succinct but hopefully clear answer. On the second part of the question, Pell is not a zero-sum game, meaning that if someone in prison receives Pell, that it's taking it away from somebody else, meaning like there's a number of Pell slots or a number of Pell dollars we're going to give out, and once we meet that cap, it's going to end, and that somehow people in prison are going to be taking it away from from students on the outside. So there is going to be no conflict between students. It's based on need, and everyone that meets the criteria can have access to a Pell Grant. So there's not special criteria, so to speak. In one sense, for people in prison, it's would this person on the inside qualify for a Pell Grant on the outside? And if the answer is yes, then that person in prison gets it. And what it does, it opens up dollars for the institution that's offering the college and prison program to be able to use those Pell dollars to fund the student's education.
Thanks, George. This might speak to a little bit, maybe Josh, what you were saying a little bit earlier, but someone in our audience is commenting on the New York State system. I too had seen a little bit about this, but our listener said that I understand that New York State has contracted with a private university to supply remote learning via iPads with no in-person learning or contact with instructors. Do you have any information about how this development could impact current programs like the Barred Prison Initiative and Marymount's Degrees programs?
I think there's someone in the audience who has more information about this than we do. Everyone in higher education in prison is pretty well aware of this development, but the one thing I want to say is that sometimes we talk about tablet computers in prisons. They're never iPads. They're usually very cheap, like Samsung Galaxy Tabs. It's a small thing, I know, but it would be lovely to get iPads and Macs inside, but that's not usually what it is. So I don't know who this person is, but maybe you would want to call on Paul and ask him to speak to this. It seems to be about Ashland University. There's a comment there.
You know, with our last few minutes that we have left, I think it would be very good of us and behoove us to touch a bit on what's next. I mean, there's been a lot in the paper regarding vaccinations and the impact of the vaccinations with incarcerated folks, conversations about basic human rights and the limited resources, prioritizing these resources. Would someone mind speaking a little bit about that? And certainly the compassionate release or the vaccine dialogue that's been going on amongst institutions and even amongst higher ed. George, would you like to take that one?
No, nobody wants to take that one.
I just wanted to throw a ball out there.
Oh, Terrence Reed. Oh my God. Oh, wow. Anyway, I just saw that in the chat. Anyway, so there is, I know Vera is working diligently. There's a new Durbin Grassley bill coming out that's hopefully going to touch something on compassionate release, but also elderly home confinement, working on data transparency inside of prisons, as we know that 59 of, I think, the top 100 sites, and if you think about populations per capita that are like hotspots are prisons. And so there's also huge work to try to get, and the problem is that, you know, each state kind of has this high level of control over what categories of people get on the list for who can have a vaccine. And so it's one thing to work at the national level, but then you have 50 states that have to work on it. We're seeing this problem of vaccinations rolling out in society. I mean, it's magnified by the 100th degree for prisons. And so there's that fight as well. Then just lastly for Pell, some of the things that people are working on is creating these guidelines, but also creating toolkits for institutions and for correctional administrators, so that way they can get quality programs up and running in a reasonable amount of time. So those are just some of the things. I think there's a Warren Presley bill. I'd have to get more information on that, but there's a number of legislative vehicles that are being proposed. But as we know, American incrementalism, things just move so slow, and people are dying, literally, as we speak. And so kind of like the time for political rhetoric is over, and we need to move, fast. So hopefully, I know there's a lot of work being done. This is my last point, a lot of work being done on what we can get into this new COVID package that's going to be brought in through budget reconciliation, to where you don't need 60 votes. So the Democrats can pass this on a 51-50 majority. And so trying to get as much as we can get into a COVID package. The problem with budget reconciliation is, though, there's actually a parliamentarian in the Senate that actually says what type of provisions can get into a budget reconciliation bill, because it has to affect the budget. And so if what we're trying to do doesn't technically affect the budget, you may not be able to do it through budget reconciliation. So there's a lot people want to do and have the political will to do. It's just that what vehicle can we get it done in? And people are trying to do as much as they can with the vehicles that we have that can move fast. And by vehicle, I mean bill.
Absolutely. I think one final question, and it's a very practical question, but I think very important. One of our listeners is asking, is there a website that has good resources about the prison education programs that are in each of the states? Is there a place that you would recommend that people go to be able to find out what prison education classes and initiatives are offered in different states?
Vera put out a report, and I can share it with you if you want to share it to everyone. I don't know if it has everything that somebody may be looking for, but it may be a good resources that answers some questions.
Thank you. So that's Vera Institute, and we can put some of these resources in our response back to all the viewers tomorrow. Along with, we're going to put a recording of this together for everyone as well. Before we conclude, is there any final thoughts, pressing issues, anything that comes from this conversation, from Josh, from Pietra, from Jerrel, from George, that you'd like to add in final words?
I want to address the thing that we let drop in your last question, which is COVID-19. I believe there are only 7 or 8 states that have decided to vaccinate prisoners alongside people who are congregated in homes for the elderly, and that is to say in stage 1B. It's become somewhat controversial, and it should not be. So in many states, and I believe New York is one of them, there are many very elderly prisoners who are medically frail, who are at heightened risk for COVID-19. And so those people might be getting vaccinated, but the rest of the population is not. I just want to remind people that being incarcerated means that you do not have the ability to seek out healthcare on your own, you cannot control your own exposure, and that every state, including New York, and just like DC and Maryland have done, should be vaccinating prisoners as a priority because they are the most vulnerable and have the very little control over their own circumstances. Otherwise, a drug crime or a minor violation can turn into and will turn into a death sentence. So I just wanted to say that out loud to make sure it was heard.
Very important. Thanks, Josh. Before we just have our concluding remarks, there's a question that came in for Jerrel. Jerrel, might you explain a little bit about communal life among the scholars at Ignacio House of Studies? Particularly, might you hit on the necessity of Sunday and what goes on with that and the enrichment activities?
Well, with the enrichment activities at Ignacio House, we've had technology, we've had trauma groups. Emotional intelligence is one that we're going to actually have in the upcoming semester. We've had financial literacy. So many of these have been beneficial to each and every one of us. And also just the community that we have together. We hold each other accountable, we're supportive of each other. And like I said prior, that it's so many things that each one of us are doing where we're doing our own different lanes. And it's just like, we're all trying to thrive. We're all trying to make the best of coming out of incarceration now back on in reentry and just trying to do better. And we all have a common goal, but we all have different lanes. And it's just like, it's amazing to just be around these many brothers who all have like so much drive and so much integrity. So it's a great place to be. Ignacio House, definitely.
Thanks so much, Jerrel. I can tell you one of the things that's been very inspiring to me of the resident scholars at Ignacio House is that in the midst of the pandemic, the care that's been taking, that each individual has taken for each other in the community. Each Sunday, they still continue to gather together for a meal and some type of community topic, all the while going to school, working, taking their college classes in the learning center that's right at the residence, but at the same time being thrust back into our community after being cut off from technology and all the computer resources for so many years, and now forced to work in this virtual world. It really is an inspiration and a testament to real resilience and courage that comes out of our brothers and sisters as they're reentering and continuing their education. Is there anyone on the panel that has any final thoughts before we conclude with some thank yous?
I can just say real quick, I wanted to mention this before, but I did want to say that this Pell win was truly like a diverse coalition where formerly incarcerated advocates were at times drivers of the strategy and instrumental in executing that strategy. And members of Congress were many times open to the statistics and the benefits and the arguments because their hearts had been softened by the stories first of people who had transformed their lives through education. And so it was easier to kind of sell the pitch for Pell after these really compelling stories.
Thanks for that, George. Thanks for that. Well, I think that concludes our conversation this evening, but this is just the beginning of our conversations together. We're very grateful for the partnership with Georgetown University, with George, with Jerrel, with Pietra, with Josh, all the good work that you're doing. We would like to just remind you that tomorrow a video recording will be sent out to all the attendees of this conversation tonight. We'd like to thank the East Coast Province of the Society of Jesus. I'd like to thank Jesuit brothers are on the call tonight. I see Jerry McClone is on, who does such wonderful work up in Syracuse behind the prison walls. Georgetown, all the Jesuit schools and universities throughout the country that are giving themselves to college education behind the walls, all the partnerships of Thrive for Life, NYU, Columbia, Manhattan College, St. Francis College in Brooklyn. They make the mission of offering a continuity of care for our brothers as they're reentering to continue their education. They make this possible, these partnerships. Above all, we'd like to thank the highly motivated and committed brothers and sisters behind the walls who are availing themselves to the quality education. Thanking all of you for being here tonight. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, contact us through the website. And above all, I would like to extend some very sincere and grateful thank you to Tara DeWarsop, who is the Director of Development for Thrive for Life Prison Project, who was really the animator of putting this all together tonight. Her zeal and enthusiasm and care for the mission is beyond compare. So I'm very grateful for her. I hope everyone has a wonderful night and may God continue to bless you.